Okay, so we're back up at Upper Laja. This is one of our light-treated streams, and I want to talk a little bit about one of the approaches that we're using to characterize the way these systems operate and how they differ from high light to low light, from guppy reaches to riv-only reaches, rivulus-only reaches. And that is the use of N15 ammonium as a tracer that allows us to determine how nitrogen cycles within these systems, how far it travels before it's taken up in the stream, but also what's taking it up. How much is going into algae associated with rocks versus bacteria and fungi in association with leaves and fine organic particles. From there, we can also track that label up into the invertebrate community and ultimately all the way into the fish. So we can see how our light manipulation alters the food web and therefore creates differences in the way bottom-up forces or food-related factors are influencing our guppy populations. We can also investigate how guppies themselves, in their introduction and as they evolve through time, are influencing the way the ecosystem is structured, the way the food web is working, relative to what we see in the rivulus sites upstream.
Dr. Thomas, let me ask you a question. You said nitrogen, N15. How is N15 delivered into the water, and why is N15 a reasonable thing to use?
Yeah, so we deliver the N15 by a metering pump. So what we'll do is we'll take ammonium N15, so as ammonium chloride, dissolve it in 80 liters of water, and then slowly pump that into the stream over a 10-day period. So that label, that tracer, the heavy nitrogen molecule, accumulates in the different biotic pools that we're interested in. And the reason we're using nitrogen and not another element is that, one, it's an essential nutrient that often limits production in streams. It's also readily available on the market relative to other isotopes such as carbon and phosphorus that have other problems. They're either expensive, they don't come in the forms that are able to be used in the stream, such as phosphorus, where it's only a radioactive isotope. In this case, we have a stable isotope of nitrogen that we can enrich without changing the concentration in the stream. So we're not enriching the stream in ammonium, we're simply changing the ratio of the heavy isotope to the lighter isotope. And in that way, we're able to track the way nitrogen moves through the food web and ultimately makes its way up to the fish.
Okay, now why does nitrogen move through a food web? You're releasing nitrogen attached to ammonia into the water, and then what happens?
Yeah, so ammonium or nitrogen, just like phosphorus, often in the form of phosphate, is an essential nutrient element that fuels the growth of algae, bacteria, and fungi. So those three categories of microorganisms are getting their nitrogen and phosphorus directly from the inorganic pools that are in the water column. So they effectively link the water column and the chemical environment to the biotic communities.
Okay, and then from the algae, then what happens?
So from the algae, of course, algae, leaves, the bacteria associated with leaves are important food resources for a variety of insect larval groups. So things like caddisflies and mayflies and stoneflies, and oftentimes here water pennies, are using those resources for growth, using those resources for food. And then, of course, those invertebrates themselves are food for both predaceous insects like odonates, dragonflies, and damselflies, but also for fish directly.
So what you're saying then is that when you put nitrogen, enriched nitrogen in the stream, you then can sample all these components and look at how they're interrelated with one another by looking for the appearance of the nitrogen label that you introduced?
That's exactly right. So one of the ways and one of the reasons this is a good approach given our treatment, given our light treatment, is one of the expectations is that we'll have a larger algal resource base in our higher light stream. And this method allows us to quantify the flow of that material, of algal material, into the food web in a high light setting versus a low light setting. So yes, we're interested in nitrogen and how it's cycling, but it also allows us to tease apart these food web connections and how they vary with our light manipulation, and how one stream might become more dependent on algal resources, those resources produced in the stream, versus resources that are delivered from the catchment, like we talked about before, as leaves fall into the stream, and as small particles are washed off into the stream from rainfall. So it allows us to assess whether or not this internal production creates a different type of food web, which then creates different selective pressures on our gut.